Are you trying to establish your brand as a thought leader? Start a podcast, invite industry experts to be guests on your show, and watch your brand become the prime resource for decision makers in your industry. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy of Sweetfish Media. I've got with me today Susan Panico, CMO of Tanium. Susan, how you doing today?
I'm great, Nikki. Thanks for having me on your program. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm out here in New Orleans for a change. I'm usually in Austin, Texas, but it's a little bit hotter here today than I'm used to.
Both great cities.
They are. I love them both. Susan and I are going to be talking about how in marketing, the lines between B2B and B2C are becoming increasingly blurred. And we're going to talk about how to approach that whole change as far as Susan is concerned here. But first, before we get into any of that, Susan, I'd love you to give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Tanium have been up to today.
Sure. So just to give you a little quick history, I spent a majority of my career at PlayStation, part of the original launch team there, and worked my way up through the organization to lead the marketing organization, and then to start a division called PlayStation Network, which is your online digital entertainment platform for PlayStation, and was there for 18 years, which nobody does anymore, anywhere these days. So had a lot of fun watching that brand and company grow. And then I moved over to Pandora, the leader in the US for digital music and audio. And that's when I made a switch, actually. A lot of people think of Pandora as B2C, but I switched over to the B2B marketing organization and helped support a large sales organization marketing to CMOs and marketers on the power of audio in their mix. And then I did a complete left turn and went into the security and IT operations industry and joined Tanium as their CMO here. And it's, really high growth tech company that focuses on the security and IT operations space by developing a leading platform to deliver those to the biggest enterprises in the world.
Man, what a career you've had. I could have an entire conversation with you just about PlayStation because I kind of, I grew up in that era. So to know that you were like in there right when they were, beginning some of the stuff that's so, just part of the framework today is, it's fascinating. But I really want to get into some of the things you talked about. So first, give a little overview of some examples of what the blurred lines between B2B and B2C look like these days, and talk about what part humanization plays in that for marketers.
Yeah, having again been on both sides, I think that with the acceleration of technology and the ubiquity of mobile, that a lot of that has blurred those lines more and more. And what we tend to forget with all the technology and the era of big data is that it's people talking to people, regardless of if you're on the B2B or the B2C side. And you need to remember that it's really important to maintain a humanization, a human side to your brand, and speak to people in that way.
How about some examples of that? I'm interested.
Yeah, sure. So on the B2C side, I think people typically think that it's more of an emotional sale, and that in B2B, it's more of a transactional sale. And I'll just use a few examples on the Tanium side. While we're this high growth, tech startup that does things that nobody else can do in our space, it's not about the technology. It's about the people whose problems we're trying to solve. And most of our audience are CIOs or VPs of IT or VPs of security. And, they get up every day and walk the halls and do their job thinking, is today the day that I'm going to get breached? Or is today the day that I'm going to have a massive disruption? And that's a very huge weight to carry on your shoulders. And there's a lot of emotion that does come with that. And I think that when you're in the B2B space, showing compassion and empathy and understanding those challenges and problems is really, really important. And that has to pull through not only in how you try to solve those problems and how you speak to them, but it has to permeate everything in your organization. So, for example, at Tanium, we have a very customer-first, customer-centric mindset. And, I love our chief customer officer says, we will never let a customer fail. And that permeates through all of our customer service, the way that we support them, the level of white glove attention that we give, and then really, again, showing that compassion. When I think about it just as a consumer myself, I want my bank to treat me like a person. I want the retailer, when I walk into a big, large box store, I want someone to be helpful and someone that's going to help me get what I need and get there quickly and realize that maybe I'm a working mom or I don't have a lot of time or that I need help getting things. So again, it's putting yourself in the other person's shoes, having the compassion, having the empathy, and having that customer first mindset.
I think you made a really important point there, and I want to make sure I highlight this distinction. So we're not talking about just when in the way that you interact or, in the way that you engage with the people who you're trying to do business with. You're saying you have to actually mean it. It's not just about treating folks like humans, but being human yourself in the way that you approach the entire thing, recognizing that, like you said, these are really human problems. And so if we come at it in any other way, we can get as clever as we want, right? But, it's not going to be as meaningful or last as long. I think that's huge. And it sort of feeds into the next point that I was wanting to talk about with you. And that's this idea of show me, you know me, right? Because when we talk about, okay, let's make it human in the way that we approach the problem. One of the ways that you can demonstrate that is showing me that you know me. Talk about that a little bit for us.
Yeah. So, I think that people these days, and particularly millennials, whether consumers or the millennial workforce, there's an expectation that you are going to know their likes, know their dislikes, know their interests, understand their behaviors. And with that, there's also an expectation that you're going to talk to them in the right tone, with the right messaging, and at the appropriate time. And, it's every marketer's holy grail. I feel like for years, people have been talking about right message at the right time, in the right place. But technology helps fuel that. But the customer's expectations or people's expectations have caught up to that. And, again, I'll use like my own personal experience of when I go to a restaurant, I go to the same restaurant almost every weekend for breakfast with my family. I want them to know my name. I want them to know where I like to sit in the restaurant. When I go to a hotel and I keep going back to the same hotel in the same city, I want them to know that I like, rooms on the high floor away from the elevator and have the right newspaper in my room. And I also, canned emails turn me off. I think they turn everybody off. I don't know anyone out there that's going to raise their hand and say, I love a canned email. Like you want to get an email that not only says, hi, Susan in it, but feels like it comes from a real human on the other side that understands what's going to be relevant to you. And that's where, both for B2C and B2B, content marketing becomes really important. And, content marketing is key, regardless of who you're talking to, but how it shows up might be a little bit different. So, at PlayStation, knowing that the audience would love to see an interview from a game developer of like the hot new game that everyone's been waiting for a year, to come out would be a very personalized piece of content that you could send to people. Whereas, say, developing a research-based white paper on the trade-offs between security and keeping the lights on for CIOs and CISOs is also very relevant, but they're pieces of content. And there's ways to personalize those with being pretty focused in how you talk to them.
For sure. For sure. Well, one of the other things, I mean, we've been talking about humanization and personalization, but one of the things I thought it was interesting the way you phrased it when it comes to how we approach these things is that we need to be surgical about customer service, about marketing, about how we approach these things. Talk a little bit about how being data driven plays into this whole thing that we're talking about.
Yeah. So, most marketers now, maybe not in really small businesses or mom and pop areas, but most marketers sit on heaps of data and they don't know what to do with that data. And most of how you achieve being human, how you achieve being relevant, how you achieve personalization, that all comes from how you leverage the data that you sit on. And again, going back to right message, right person, right time. And that leveraging that data allows you to pinpoint and become much more surgical so that you eliminate a lot of the wasted dollars and wasted efforts and wasted time. But I say all that too with a caveat of, I feel like there's this trend because we have so much data that people often feel that they have to use like every piece of it and maybe like fall into this abyss of overwhelming amounts of data. And I think it's still really important to balance the art and science of it. Like just because you're in B2B doesn't mean you can't be creative. And it doesn't mean, again, when you pull out that humanization aspect, that you can talk to people like people, whether it's bringing in some wit or being clever or showing people things in a way that they haven't seen it before. So all of that really intersects both the art and science of it.
I love that. I regularly get into, I won't say scraps, but some pretty heated conversations on LinkedIn about how much these things, marketing and sales, how much of them, are science and how much of them are art and what that ratio needs to be. And I think it's these folks that insist that it's all one or the other, I think that they're missing the point about, it being about humanization, about people at the end of the day. And since people aren't all one or the other, I think an approach that was all science or all art and that didn't have that ratio of the two, like you're talking about, that's why it wouldn't work because it's not how people work. So really interesting way to think about it.
Well, and I think that what's a huge challenge, particularly for smaller companies, when you think about personalization is that, that's harder to do, right? And it's harder to scale, but I think it pays off in the long run. Just in my position now, I think about, I must get about, dozens of people hitting me up every single day to try to sell me something. And every once in a while, something very highly personalized, very relevant, and very smart and clever comes through. And those are the people that I'll take the meeting with, even if I'm really don't need their product at the time. Just as a marketer, I find that I love being reciprocal to something that was smart that came across, but then also it's good to hear the pitch.
Yeah, for sure. It keeps you sharp.
Yeah.
So this has been great. I think that you've hit on some really valuable points that are going to resonate with a lot of our listeners. And I've got to sit here and pick your brain and try and get some stuff out of it. And now is the part of the show where I ask about what you are putting in it. Susan, what learning resources, what books or blogs or podcasts have you been, listening to or reading that are speaking to you, exciting to you, or informing your approach? Doesn't have to be marketing or sales related. Just tell us what's exciting you these days.
Yeah, so great question. Being a working mom of 3 and having a lot on the plate, there's not a lot of time for too much of that. Really how I learn and stay sharp is I have a strong network of other CMOs that we meet on a quarterly basis. And there's so many smart people out there that, are either have great track records or are also doing a lot of things for the first time. And I often find that my peer group and network is the best way to learn from other people. From a podcast perspective, I do love podcasts. It's about the only thing I have time for anymore. This is a great educational one, but I love like Lance Armstrong's Forward podcast.
Yes.
He has
yes.
so many great guests on that with such insightful and meaningful stories, and different than I think that you would expect to get from something like that.
Yeah, no, one of my favorite answers when I ask that question is when people refer to other humans in their life that they're learning from. Because I think it is easy and we, especially in the sort of echo chamber of LinkedIn, right? To be all of us reading the same 3 books on how to sell or how to market. So it's refreshing to hear an answer like yours. Susan, one more thing. I know folks are going to want to follow along with what you're doing. You've had such a career, and you're continuing to do such cool stuff over at Tanium. How can folks connect with you?
So ping me on LinkedIn, Susan Panico, and be patient if it takes me a little while to get back to you because of some of those irrelevant ads that come my way. Happy to engage in meaningful conversation in there.
Sweet. Same. Thanks so much, Susan. This has been great. You have a good one.
Okay. Thanks, Nikki.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.